And that was what talked you into getting out of journalism.
Well, I was in it for a long time.
Oh, I know. Well,
I do. Do you keep in touch with Edie?
My name's Nikki.
Anyway, the front
Yeah, Nikki, we gotta want to plan
No, I know. I couldn't
really
about
quickly.
the last 5
Really
years.
quickly?
And
Yeah.
then, had you
think we
talked
can
to
arrange
her?
No, we were both in
can.
Greenville
How you guys
for
doing
a while,
tonight?
and then I
Very
left,
good.
and I don't know
Did
what happened
she
to
stay
her.
at the
Is it going to be
meeting?
really a horrible
I don't know,
thing if
because
we
that was
ask
like in
for
1980.
separate checks?
I
don't know.
Okay,
Well,
great.
she, you remember she
Well, I
like
would
had that
like,
relationship with
a
Jane
glass
for a
of Chardonnay,
while,
and
and then the last few years. Oh wait.
What's the house?
Deloach is our
I have
house.
a glass of the
Okay.
What kind of beer is
We have something a little different, something very special tonight. Instead of just me, we have the fabulous Kathy Trocek, who is going to introduce our speaker tonight. And I would do normally a lengthy introduction of Kathy, but everybody here seems to know her already, so let's just get on with it. And here's Kathy Trocek.
Thank you, Bill, and it's great to be in my hometown, my adopted hometown library here in Decatur, and it's great to be here on time this time. For those of you who were here the last time I was supposed to be here, when Bill called me when I was sitting at Leon's having dinner and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm on my first cocktail. What do you want?" Anyway, it's great to be here in Decatur tonight, and I have the distinct pleasure, okay, I have had a cocktail, I've been to Feast. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a friend, a classmate, and a former colleague tonight. Deborah and I graduated from the University of Georgia, go Dogs, in 1976, and we worked, there are several of us here tonight. We had a little mini reunion of folks who worked on the Georgia school newspaper, the Red and Black. And working at the Red and Black in the 1970s was a unique experience. I think a lot of us spent more time in the newspaper office than we did in the classroom, which turned out to be a good idea, since we learned by doing. And I don't think, there are several, we had a little mini reunion tonight of former staffers, and I don't think any of my former colleagues and friends would disagree with me when I say that if we had if we had a class superlative, I would have been nominated as least likely to succeed, or most likely to end up at an obscure shopper newspaper in South Florida. And Deborah Blum would have been nominated as most likely to succeed. She was our news editor and our editor-in-chief at the Red and Black, a brilliant writer, and actually someone who occasionally made it to class, unlike most of us, I think. Anyway, she left the Red and Black and went to work right out of college at the Macon paper, Deborah?
Gainesville, and then Macon.
Gainesville, Georgia, and then Macon, and then she ended up at the St. Pete Times, which was my hometown paper. Married along the way, went out to California to seek a man and her fortune, and eventually went to grad school, and oh, did I mention while she was in California, she picked up a little something called a Pulitzer Prize for a series she did for the Sacramento Bee called The Monkey Wars, right, Deborah? And she subsequently did a book after that. She is, these days, a professor. Does your professorship have a title, Deborah?
It has the title, I don't use it much.
It's the...
Helen Franklin Professor of Journalism.
Right. It's the...
That's why I don't use it.
It's the blah, 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 Distinguished Chair of Journalism at University of Wisconsin, go Badgers, right? And Deborah's here tonight to tell us about The Poisoner's Handbook, her latest book, and I've been reading it, and it's fascinating, and if you love crime as I do, I think you'll be as spellbound as I have been. So please welcome Deborah Blum.
I've been book touring around the country, and I was telling one of my friends, this is the 11th city in the last 5 weeks, and being in Georgia has been my favorite part of the tour. Yay! Yeah, no, seriously, my folks still live here. I had a wonderful time seeing old friends all over Georgia, and felt really lucky in my friends. So I want to start by just telling you what a pleasure it is to be here. And then having, I hope, persuaded you that as I cited in the book, was a man who had committed suicide. He shot himself right here, bullet had gone out the top of his head. They found him with the gun still in his hand, powder residue all over him. And if you look at the death certificate, it says ruptured aneurysm. Now, something ruptured when he fired that bullet, but that was clearly a paid-off cause of death. So you would then think, finally the state came around and they said to New York, you have got to do something about this. We want you to have a professional medical examiner. And instead of embracing this, the party machine, they had one of their favorite coroners in place at the time. He was a doctor who had been kicked out of his practice for killing too many patients. He was such a notorious alcoholic that he had to hire assistants to hold him up at crime scenes, and they wanted to keep him. And so when Charles Norris and 2 others, pathologists, applied for this job, they required them all to perform autopsies as part of the application. And then they criminally prosecuted them for performing autopsies and that were outside the normal operation of autopsies. And so they all ended up in the courtroom with lawyers until the governor of New York came in again and said, knock this off, you're putting these guys in. And the mayor of New York was so exasperated that instead of hiring the most qualified person on their application process, he hired Charles Norris, who would come in lower. And Norris was, as it turned out, the perfect person for this job. He was actually pay attention. Has to do with arsenic in poultry. Have you guys heard this? So, and I actually didn't heard this either. I was on this all-night radio show called Coast to Coast AM, which is it's a great show. You listen to that show. It's a great show. It's a brilliant reader. I mean, it has an audience of 3 million insomniacs or people who work at night. And the lots of doctors. I was amazed at the number of doctors and lawyers I heard from afterwards. But one of the things that came up on Coast to Coast AM was that one of the more commonly used poultry feeds in this country is called, I cannot say this, it's like I have a handicap with it, Roxarsone, Roxarsone, and it contains arsenic. And it had the FDA approved arsenic in poultry feed in 1945, and we've had it in our poultry feed ever since. And the reason it's approved as an anti-parasitic, right, to keep parasites out of poultry, but after they started giving it to turkeys and chickens and ducks, I guess, they discovered that it has this wonderful side effect, which is that it makes the meat look pinker. It enlarges the blood vessels, and so when you sell the poultry meat in a grocery store, you can get that kind of rosy look to the meat because of the arsenic effect. And when they have done random tests on commercially processed chickens, some of them have been above the EPA level on arsenic. Now, arsenic's a bad, you don't want to mess around with that. I'm going to myself, why are we doing this? Well, we've known since the 1700s that arsenic was a bad poison. Why doesn't the FDA not do that? Why don't they block it? And there was, in fact, a congressman who introduced a bill in the fall to try to force the FDA to do this, and it got 0 traction. It just went nowhere. So I thought to myself that I would eventually, sometime this year, pick that story up again and try to give it a little more publicity, because I do think it's important for us to know, there's no risk-free world. We live on a planet that produces more poisons than we'll ever create, right? Arsenic is a naturally occurring element. Mercury is a naturally occurring element. Plants are more poisonous than anything except those compounds that we produce in biowarfare laboratories. So it's not as if we were born on a perfectly safe planet, but I think it's reasonable to expect that with a classic poison like arsenic, we would want our government to try to make sure we have low exposure. So that's my long rambling answer.
Kind of semi-professional in here. You do a wonderful job. It's very engaging, the narrative, and the way you tell stories. You're obviously interested and excited. We can't tell you've been doing this for weeks and weeks.
Yes. I think that's my major legacy, is that no one can tell what I'm like. So, but I do like the subject. I really do. So.
Yeah, it's just, you did a great job. And I wish I could come take your class.
I do too, actually. It looks kind of vivid
that one.
Science journal. We didn't have
so
anything
good.
like that.
Tricia, TRICIA, right?
CIA, right.
Yeah.
So